The Zeph-High Dominion stretched across 47 star systems, encompassing 312 worlds, each one bending the knee to a single absolute authority. For 7,000 cycles, their golden fleets had swept through space like divine judgment, bringing order to chaos, civilization to the primitive, and submission to the defiant. Emperor Kakstahar, whose name meant the unwavering storm in the ancient tongue, stood at the observation deck of the flagship Eternal Conquest. His 6 arms folded in contemplation. His crystalline exoskeleton caught the light of distant stars, refracting it into prismatic patterns across the command chamber. 3 eyes, each the size of a human fist, gazed out at the cosmic darkness with the weight of absolute power. He had ruled for 300 cycles. He had conquered 18 species. He had never smiled. Behind him the bridge hummed with the efficient precision of a war machine perfected over millennia. Holographic displays showed fleet positions, supply lines, and tactical assessments in constantly shifting arrays of light, the crew beings of various conquered species, all bearing the neural compliance implants that ensured their loyalty moved with choreographed purpose. "Your Eternal Majesty," came the voice of Fleet Commander Nyx Varro, her 4-legged form approaching with the measured gait of military discipline. "The final reconnaissance of the target system is complete," Korvax said. It did not turn. Speak. The 3rd planet shows all the expected characteristics of primitive aggression. Constant warfare between tribal factions, weapons of crude atomic fission, atmospheric pollution indicating industrial excess without restraint. She paused, her segmented antennae twitching with what might have been anticipation. "They call themselves human?" The Emperor's middle eye slowly rotated to fix upon her. "Death Worlder? The preliminary genetic analysis suggests extreme adaptation to environmental hostility, gravity that would crush most of our auxiliary species, atmospheric composition that borders on toxic and she hesitated. Continue. They appear to find combat enjoyable. Your Majesty, our deep scan monitoring detected organized violence conducted for entertainment purposes. They call it sports." For the first time in 50 cycles, something almost resembling interest flickered across Quark's Thalar's features. The Dominion had encountered 17 different categories of primitive species across their expansion. Agricultural societies grateful for uplift, nomadic cultures easily absorbed, warrior races that fought fiercely before inevitable surrender. But Death Worlders were different. "Show me," he commanded. The main display shimmered and resolved into a 3-dimensional representation of Earth, slowly rotating like a blue-green jewel suspended in space. Cities glowed like circuit patterns across the continents. Weather systems swirled in massive spirals that would have been lethal storms on any civilized world. Population? Approximately 7 billion, Nyx Varro reported. Technology level early atomic age, with primitive space capabilities limited to their immediate orbital zone. Military capacity fragmented among hundreds of nation-states. No unified command structure. Weaknesses? Complete. No orbital defense platforms. No energy shielding. No long-range sensors capable of detecting our approach until we achieve visual contact. She gestured with one of her manipulator arms, and red targeting indicators appeared over major population centers. Conservative estimates suggest complete subjugation within 48 standard hours. Korvax, Thalar's 3 eyes focused on different sections of the display, processing multiple data streams simultaneously. The Emperor, who had brought the proud Vectorans to their knees in a single battle, who had watched the crystalline cities of Mordun crack and fall like broken glass, who had never met resistance that lasted longer than a season. "And yet," he said quietly, "something troubles you, Fleet Commander." Nyx Varro's antennae drooped slightly. "Permission to speak candidly, Your Eternal Majesty." "Granted." "The preliminary behavioral analysis, it shows patterns we have never encountered. They possess individual creativity that approaches chaos. Their art forms are unpredictable, and they demonstrate what our xenopsychologists classify as humor, a cognitive function that serves no apparent survival purpose." Humor? They find satisfaction in unexpected juxtapositions of meaning, cognitive surprises that produce involuntary vocalizations. She paused. Our analysts cannot determine its tactical value. The Emperor stared at the rotating planet for a long moment. In his 3 centuries of rule, he had mastered the art of reading species. Fear he understood. Aggression was familiar. Desperation was predictable. But this was something else. Schedule the fleet for immediate departure, he decided. I want to observe these humans firsthand. Your Majesty will personally oversee the conquest. I will personally conduct it. His voice carried the finality of a gravitational collapse. Assemble the War Council. Begin preparations for full orbital bombardment protocols. And command, yes, Your Eternal Majesty. Begin deep monitoring of their information networks. I want to understand this humor before we remove it from the galaxy. 7 light-years away, in a small apartment above a failing pizza shop in Toledo, Ohio, Danny Mackenzie was having the worst month of his professional life. The microphone stand tilted at a precarious angle, held upright only by years of accumulated tape and stubborn hope. The spotlight burned hot against his face, illuminating exactly 12 people scattered across the dim interior of the Laughingstock, a comedy club that had seen better decades. So I went to my doctor last week, Danny said, gripping the mic with sweaty palms. He tells me I have the spine of a 70-year-old. I said, Doc, I'm 32. He says, that's why I went to medical school. Silence stretched like a funeral shroud. In the back booth, Margaret Flanagan, the club owner, chain smoker, and Danny's last remaining supporter in the comedy world, took a long drag from her cigarette and shook her head. 3 strikes. He was out. Thank you. You've been present, Danny concluded, stepping away from the mic to the sound of maybe 4 half-hearted claps. He made his way through the tables, past the couple arguing in whispers, past the drunk businessman scrolling through his phone, past the group of college students who had clearly stumbled in by mistake. The same faces that had watched him die on stage every Tuesday night for the past 6 months. Danny. Margaret's voice carried the weight of inevitable bad news. Sit down. He slumped into the cracked vinyl booth across from her, still wearing the cheap suit his ex-girlfriend had bought him back when she believed in his dreams. Back when he believed in them too. I'm cutting the Tuesday slot, she said without preamble. Business is down 30% from last year. I can't afford to pay comedians to clear the room. Margaret, come on. I just need more time to find my voice, you know. Comedy is about timing, and I'm still... Danny. She stubbed out her cigarette with finality. You're a good kid. You work harder than anybody I know. But funny isn't something you learn. It's something you are. The words hit him like a physical blow. 6 years of open mics. 4 years of actual bookings. 2 years of slowly diminishing crowds and increasingly desperate material. All of it leading to this moment in a failing comedy club in a city that Toledo. What am I supposed to do now? He asked quietly. Margaret's expression softened. Find something else, honey. Something that makes you happy. Danny walked out into the Ohio night past the broken streetlights and the scattered groups of college students heading toward brighter venues. The autumn air carried the scent of coming winter and fading dreams. Above him, invisible and impossible to imagine, the advanced sensors of the Dominion fleet had just locked onto Earth's position. The greatest military force in galactic history was beginning its final approach. And in 48 hours, everything Danny Mackenzie thought he understood about his small, disappointing life would change forever. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through job listings. Assistant manager, Dollar General, night shift security. Customer service representative. The universe in all its vast indifference continued to expand around him. Aboard the Eternal Conquest, Emperor Cockley stood before the assembled War Council, the greatest military minds in the Dominion. Representatives from 12 conquered species, each one expert in their particular form of warfare, all unified under the neural compliance system that ensured absolute loyalty. The final approach will commence in 36 standard hours, he announced. Fleet Admiral Zek Murai. Report on bombardment preparations. The towering Vecta Terran officer. One of the few survivors of their homeworld's resistance stepped forward. Orbital strike platforms are fully charged. Your Eternal Majesty. Targeting computers have identified 2,147 population centers for initial bombardment. Estimated casualty rate 93% within the first 6 hours. Acceptable. Ground Commander Huxtallion, status of occupation forces? The insectoid warrior's mandibles clicked rapidly. 3 million shock troops prepared for immediate deployment. Pacification protocols updated for Death Whirler resistance patterns. All units equipped with enhanced armor rated for high-gravity operations. Intelligence Coordinator Vex Harl Kixthalar continued. Final assessment of human capability. The pale, ethereal being that had once led the psychic resistance of Morden floated forward, her consciousness interfacing directly with the ship's data networks. Humans demonstrate typical primitive patterns with one significant anomaly. Your Eternal Majesty. While their technology remains crude, their information networks show extraordinary creative diversity. They produce entertainment content at rates that exceed consumption capacity. Entertainment? Music, visual narratives, interactive games, and humor. Massive quantities of humor transmitted globally in real time. Our analysis suggests they find satisfaction in shared cognitive surprise. Korvax Tithalar's 3 eyes narrowed. Show me. The holographic display shifted to show intercepted human internet traffic. Images flashed past in rapid succession. Moving pictures of humans in exaggerated situations. Brief text exchanges that seemed to serve no functional purpose. Recordings of humans speaking to audiences who responded with synchronized vocalizations. This is humor, the Emperor asked. Our best interpretation, Your Majesty. They appear to derive pleasure from unexpected connections between disparate concepts. They call it comedy. One recording lingered on the display. A human male standing on a small platform, speaking into a metal object, while other humans sat and periodically erupted in what the subtitle identified as laughter. And so my wife says, "Do these jeans make me look fat?" I said, "No, honey, your fat makes you look fat. The jeans are just what we use to contain it." The audience's response was immediate and vigorous, a cacophony of vocal expressions that seemed to indicate pleasure despite the apparently hostile content. They mock each other, observed Zekmurai, and find enjoyment in it. More complex than mockery, Vaxifel replied. They seem to use humor as a social bonding mechanism, a way to acknowledge shared experiences of difficulty or absurdity. Korvax Stilar studied the image of the human performer. Average height. Ordinary appearance. No visible weapons or tactical enhancement. And yet he commanded the attention of dozens of his species through nothing but organized sound patterns. "This is their warrior caste?" he asked. "Negative, Your Eternal Majesty. According to our intelligence, this individual's designation is comedian. It appears to be a specialized role focused entirely on humor production. And they're actual warriors, fragmented among thousands of competing factions. No unified command structure. Most have never experienced combat outside of simulation." The Emperor remained silent for several minutes, processing this information. In his 3 centuries of conquest, he had learned to read the patterns of species behavior. Agricultural societies developed cooperation. Nomadic cultures valued independence. Warrior races respected strength. But these humans, they appeared to value something else entirely. Something that served no obvious survival function. Something that made no tactical sense. Proceed with the original plan, he decided. Full orbital bombardment, complete subjugation. But, he paused, studying the frozen image of the human comedian. "I want live specimens of their humor cast preserved for analysis. Your will be done, Your Eternal Majesty." As the War Council dispersed to their final preparations, Korvax Sidthur remained alone with the holographic display. The human comedian's face stared back at him, frozen in what their species apparently considered an expression of amusement. What possible purpose could this serve? The Emperor wondered. What evolutionary advantage could there be in organized cognitive surprise? For the first time in 3 centuries, Emperor Kalkthalar encountered a question he could not answer. And for reasons he could not begin to understand, this troubled him more than any military resistance ever had. Danny Mackenzie's alarm clock screamed at 6:47 a.m., jarring him from dreams of successful punchlines and appreciative audiences. Sunlight filtered through the cracked window of his studio apartment, illuminating a space that could generously be called minimalist and more accurately described as broke. He had exactly $47 in his checking account. Rent was due in 5 days. The pizza shop downstairs had stopped offering him free meals after he'd made one too many jokes about their health code violations. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. "How did last night go?" Danny stared at the ceiling and composed his response. "Great. Standing ovation. Margaret wants to give me my own show." Then he deleted it and typed, "It went fine." Then he deleted that and typed, "Same as always." He hit send and immediately regretted his honesty. The phone rang almost instantly. "Danny, honey, are you okay?" His sister's voice carried that particular blend of love and worry that only family could perfect. "I'm fine, Lisa. Just thinking about next steps. You know, you can always come stay with us for a while. Mike's been saying there might be an opening at his company. Insurance sales. The final refuge of broken dreams. I appreciate it, but I'm not ready to give up yet. Danny, it's been 6 years. I know how long it's been." The words came out sharper than he intended. "Look, I've got to get going. Job interview today." Another lie, but better than the truth. He spent the morning scrolling through job listings and comedy clips on YouTube, comparing his material to performers who actually made people laugh. The algorithm seemed determined to show him everything he wasn't: a confident, naturally funny, successful. At 2:17 p.m., his phone rang with an unknown number. "Hello? Is this Danny McKenzie?" The voice was professionally cheerful in that distinctly Midwestern way. "Yeah? Great. This is Jessica from WTOL News. We're doing a segment on local performers and Margaret Flanagan gave us your name. Would you be interested in being interviewed?" Danny's heart stopped. Television. Actual media coverage. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was his break. "Absolutely," he said, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. "When do you need me?" "How about this afternoon? We're filming at the Laughingstock around 4. I'll be there." He spent the next hour rehearsing answers to questions he hoped they would ask, practicing his best material in the bathroom mirror, trying to transform 6 years of consistent failure into something that sounded like emerging success. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that at that exact moment, 4.3 light-years away, the advanced scouts of the Sci-Fi Dominion fleet were conducting their final reconnaissance of Earth's orbital patterns. What he couldn't imagine was that in less than 24 hours, the most powerful military force in galactic history would arrive in his solar system with the expressed intention of ending human civilization. What he had no way of predicting was that his life, ordinary, struggling, disappointingly normal, was about to become the most important thing in the galaxy. But at 3:45 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in Toledo, Ohio, Danny McKenzie was just a failed comedian with $47, walking toward what he hoped might be his last chance at the dream that had been slowly killing him for 6 years. The universe had a sense of humor. He just didn't know it yet. The WTOL News van arrived at the Laughingstock with the punctuality of Midwestern professionalism, its satellite dish gleaming in the late afternoon sun like a metallic flower reaching toward the sky. Danny had been waiting in the club for 20 minutes, pacing between the empty tables and rehearsing answers to questions that increasingly seemed too optimistic. Jessica turned out to be younger than he'd expected, with the kind of aggressive competence that suggested she was fighting her way up from local news to something bigger. Her cameraman, a tired-looking guy named Paul, set up his equipment with the resigned efficiency of someone who had filmed 1,000 small stories that nobody would remember. "So, Danny?" Jessica said, settling into the booth across from him while Paul adjusted his lighting. "Tell me about the comedy scene here in Toledo." The first question, and already he was in trouble. What comedy scene, he thought. The Laughingstock is literally the only club in town, and Margaret just fired me. "Well," he began carefully, "Toledo has a really intimate comedy community. Very supportive. We all help each other develop our material." "That's wonderful. And how long have you been performing?" "About 6 years." "6 years? You must have quite a following by now." Danny glanced around the empty club. 12 tables, 48 chairs, all of them vacant except for the ones they were occupying. "I've built up a loyal, core audience." Paul rolled his eyes behind the camera. "Can you tell us about your comedy style?" Jessica continued. "What makes Danny McKenzie unique?" This was the question he had prepared for, the one that was supposed to showcase his artistic vision and potential for future success. But sitting under the hot lights, in the club where he had died on stage just 16 hours earlier, the words felt like ash in his mouth. I try to find humor in ordinary situations. The stuff everybody deals with but doesn't usually talk about. Relationships, work, family, the way we all pretend our lives are more together than they actually are. That sounds very relatable. Can you give us a sample? The moment every comedian dreams of and dreads, the request for free material. Danny cleared his throat and launched into his best bit, the one about his doctor, refined through months of workshopping. So I went to my doctor last week. He tells me I have the spine of a 70-year-old. I said, "Doc, I'm 32. He says, "Yeah, but you've got the emotional maturity of a 12-year-old, so it averages out to about 41, which is still pretty concerning." Silence. Jessica smiled politely. Paul continued filming with professional indifference. That's very clever," Jessica said in the tone of someone who had never laughed at anything in her life. "Very observational." Danny felt the familiar weight settling on his chest. The crushing recognition that something he had believed was funny simply wasn't. That the gap between his intention and the audience's response might be unbridgeable. "And what are your plans for the future?" Jessica asked. "Where do you see your career going?" "Nowhere," he thought. "Straight into the ground at terminal velocity. I'm always working on new material," he said instead. "Comedy is about growth, you know? Evolution. Finding new ways to connect with people." 237,000 miles above their heads, the first probe of the Zephax-Simonian fleet crossed the orbit of Earth's moon, its sensors immediately cataloging everything from atmospheric composition to radio frequency emissions. Within nanoseconds, the probe's artificial intelligence had processed 17,000 hours of human television broadcasts, 43 million social media posts, and the complete contents of every major news network's digital archives. The data stream flowed directly to Emperor Cuxalar's command chamber, where it was analyzed, categorized, and translated by the most sophisticated xenopsychological computers in the galaxy. "Initial assessment confirms primitive status," reported Intelligence Coordinator Vexisharil. "No orbital defenses detected. No energy weapons. No signs of awareness of our approach." "And their information networks?" Quaxthalar asked, studying the streams of data flowing across multiple displays. "Fascinating, Your Eternal Majesty. They appear to communicate primarily through what they term entertainment. Music, visual narratives, and extensive humor distribution. The volume is unprecedented." One display showed a real-time analysis of human internet traffic. Every second, millions of new pieces of content were uploaded. Short videos, text posts, images with superimposed text, recordings of humans speaking to audiences. "They create humor faster than they can consume it," Vexisharil observed. "It serves no apparent survival function, yet they devote enormous resources to its production and distribution." "Show me their news broadcasts," the Emperor commanded. The display shifted to show selected samples of human journalism. Political arguments, economic reports, weather forecasts, and then buried among the serious content segments about local interests. Community theater, restaurant openings, human interest stories. One caught his attention. A news crew interviewing a human male in what appeared to be a primitive gathering space. "This is Danny Mackenzie," the female interviewer saying, a local comedian who's been part of Toledo's comedy scene for 6 years. The Emperor's three eyes focused on the male human. Average physical specimens. No visible weapons or enhancement. Unremarkable in every measurable way, and yet he was identified as a specialist in humor production. "Increase magnification," Quaxthaval ordered. The display zoomed in on Danny's face as he spoke. "I try to find humor in ordinary situations. The stuff everybody deals with but doesn't usually talk about." "What is he doing?" the Emperor asked. "According to our analysis, he is performing," Vexisharil replied. "Attempting to produce humor for an audience." They watched as Danny delivered what their translation software identified as a joke. A structured narrative designed to produce cognitive surprise and accompanying laughter. No laughter followed. "He has failed," observed Quaxthalar. Yes, your Eternal Majesty. According to our behavioral analysis, this individual's humor production appears to be ineffective. The Emperor studied Danny's face, noting the subtle expressions that their emotion recognition software labeled as disappointment, embarrassment, and determination. A failed humor producer, clinging to a role for which he was clearly unsuited. Interesting, Korkfowler murmured. Archive this individual's data. I want full behavioral analysis. Your Eternal Majesty? A species that devotes resources to failed humor production suggests cognitive patterns we do not understand. Continue monitoring. The interview concluded after another 10 minutes of increasingly awkward questions. Danny watched the news crew pack up their equipment with the sinking realization that his 15 minutes of fame would likely be edited down to 30 seconds of pity television. When will this air? He asked Jessica, as she prepared to leave. Probably Friday night during our local spotlight segment. Thanks so much for your time. They left him alone in the laughingstock with the familiar weight of another missed opportunity. Margaret emerged from her office, cigarette already in hand. How'd it go? She asked. About as well as everything else in my career. She studied his face for a moment, then made a decision. You know what? Come back Thursday night. I thought you cut my slot. I did, but Thursday's open mic night, give it one more shot. If you bomb, we're done. If you kill, she shrugged. Maybe I was wrong. Danny felt a flicker of the hope he'd been trying to suppress. Really? Really? But Danny, don't just do your regular material. Try something different. Something that matters to you. That evening, Danny sat in his apartment with a legal pad, trying to write something different. Something that mattered. He thought about his conversation with Lisa, about the job listings he'd been avoiding, about the growing certainty that comedy might not be his calling. What if Margaret was right? What if funny wasn't something you learned but something you were? He wrote, what if you spend 6 years trying to make people laugh, and the only person who never laughs is you? He crossed it out. Too depressing. He wrote, they say comedy is tragedy plus time. What they don't tell you is that sometimes tragedy plus time just equals more tragedy. He crossed that out too. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that at that exact moment, 2.3 light-years away, Emperor Quixthalar was studying recordings of his failed interview with the same intensity he had once devoted to analyzing the defensive strategies of conquered worlds. What he couldn't imagine was that the ruler of the greatest military force in galactic history was becoming genuinely curious about the psychological mechanics of humor failure. What he had no way of predicting was that his struggle to find something meaningful to say was about to become the most scrutinized creative process in the known universe. But at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in Toledo, Ohio, Danny Mackenzie was just a man with a legal pad, trying to find words that might bridge the gap between his dreams and his reality. The universe was watching. He just didn't know it yet. The main fleet of the Zeph-High Dominion completed its final approach to the Sol system at 3:22 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the asteroid belt with the coordinated precision that had made them masters of the galaxy. 47 capital ships, each one capable of sterilizing a continent. 300 support vessels carrying ground forces, siege equipment, and occupation personnel. The eternal conquest at the center of the formation, its command spire gleaming like a crystalline dagger pointed at the heart of human civilization. Every sensor on Earth should have detected them immediately. Every radio telescope should have erupted with warnings. Every government should have activated emergency protocols. But human technology, primitive and limited, registered nothing beyond the ordinary background noise of cosmic radiation. Emperor Cuptar stood at his observation deck, watching the small blue world that held 7 billion lives, none of whom yet knew that their planet was now occupied space. In 6 hours, orbital bombardment would begin. In 12 hours, ground forces would deploy. In 24 hours, human civilization would be a footnote in Dominion historical records. It was the 47th world he had conquered. It should have felt routine. Instead, he found himself thinking about the failed comedian. Your Eternal Majesty, came the voice of Fleet Commander Nix Avoro. Final bombardment calculations are complete. All ships report ready status. Proceed with Q-Star stopped. Wait, Your Majesty. The humor producer from the intercepted broadcast. Do we have his location? The individual designated Danny Mackenzie. Yes, Your Majesty. Geographic coordinates place him in the North American territory, subsection designated Ohio. Ohio. The Emperor tested the alien word. Delay bombardment by 12 hours. Your Majesty. Nix Viral's antennae twitched with confusion. The fleet is prepared for immediate. I want to observe this species' behavior patterns before we eliminate them. Begin deep monitoring of their information networks. Focus particularly on humor production activities. As you command, Your Eternal Majesty. Korvac Stifar remained at the observation deck as his fleet settled into position around the planet. Invisible death, suspended above a world that continued its ordinary rotation, unaware that tomorrow's sunrise might be its last. But the Emperor, who had never known doubt, found himself genuinely curious about a question that had no tactical relevance. What makes them laugh? And more mysteriously, why does this failed comedian continue trying? For the first time in 3 centuries of conquest, Corbethalar postponed an invasion not for strategic reasons but for something he could only identify as interest. Danny Mackenzie, asleep in his small apartment above the pizza shop, had exactly 36 hours to discover whether his comedy career was over or just beginning. The universe, it seemed, had a deadline. At 6:47 a.m. on Thursday morning, Danny Mackenzie's alarm clock screamed him awake to a world that was ending. Not that he knew it. The sun rose over Toledo with the same indifferent punctuality it had maintained for billions of years, casting long shadows through his cracked window and across the legal pad where he had finally, after hours of false starts and crossed-out lines, written something that might actually matter. 3 pages of material. Not jokes, exactly. More like observations about failure, about the space between what you want to be and what you are, about the courage it takes to keep trying when you're genuinely demonstrably bad at something. It wasn't funny in the traditional sense. It probably wasn't funny at all. But it was true. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. Saw the news segment online. You looked great. Proud of you. Danny checked the WTOL website and found the clip. 37 seconds of his 6-year career, edited to make him seem almost competent. The comments section was mercifully brief. 2 nice job responses and one that simply said meh. Meh. The sound of dreams deflating. 400 miles above his head, Emperor Kiklis Thalar stood before the assembled war council in the command chamber of the Eternal Conquest, reviewing the final phase of Earth's conquest. Around them, holographic displays showed real-time intelligence feeds from the planet below, military installations, communication networks, population density maps, and in the corner of one screen, almost as an afterthought, small red dot marking the location of a comedy club in Ohio. Status report, the Emperor commanded. Orbital bombardment platforms remain at full readiness, reported Fleet Admiral Zek Morai. All primary targets confirmed. Estimated civilian casualties within acceptable parameters. Ground assault preparations complete, added Ground Commander Hike Stallion. Shock troops deployed and awaiting your command, Your Eternal Majesty. Intelligence analysis of final resistance potential? Korvac Thiller asked. Intelligence Coordinator Vexifil folded forward, her ethereal form interfacing with the ship's data networks. Minimal, Your Majesty. Their fragmented military structure lacks unified command protocols. Most of their defensive systems are designed for combat with their own species, not orbital assault. And their information networks? Continuing to produce humor at unprecedented rates. Analysis suggests they use comedy as a psychological defense mechanism against existential anxiety. The Emperor's 3 eyes focused on different data streams simultaneously. Show me current activity levels. The display shifted to show real-time internet traffic patterns. Millions of humans, all across the planet, creating and sharing content in the final hours before their civilization ended. Jokes about work, complaints about relationships, videos of domestic animals behaving in amusing ways, none of them aware that 47 capital ships hung in the darkness above them like patient vultures. They're still laughing, quacks, Nalir observed. Yes, Your Majesty. Even now, humor production continues at normal levels. They appear completely unaware of our presence, and the specific individual we've been monitoring, Danny Mackenzie continues his preparation for tonight's performance. Our analysis suggests he has abandoned his previous humor production patterns in favor of more personal material. On a secondary display, they could see the heat signature of Danny's small apartment, the electromagnetic pattern of his simple electronic devices, the behavioral analysis suggesting he was currently in a state of what humans called nervous anticipation. He persists, Corfatseller said quietly, despite consistent failure. Yes, Your Majesty. Why? It was the question that had been troubling the Emperor for 18 hours. By every logical analysis, Danny Mackenzie should have abandoned his humor production attempts after the first few failures. Natural selection should have eliminated such maladaptive behavior patterns. The resources he devoted to an obviously unsuccessful activity could have been directed toward more viable survival strategies. And yet he continued. Our xenopsychological analysis suggests it may be connected to their concept of hope, Vexamerl offered. A cognitive distortion that allows them to persist in statistically unlikely endeavors. Hope. Another human word with no direct translation into any of the 47 languages of the Dominion. And this serves what evolutionary function? Unknown, Your Majesty. It appears to be purely psychological. A way of maintaining function despite objective evidence of failure. Korvac Stellar studied the data streams for several minutes. Hope. Humor. The willingness to fail repeatedly in pursuit of something that might not even exist. Delay the bombardment another 6 hours, he decided. Your Eternal Majesty? Fleet Admiral Zekmarais stepped forward. The fleet has been in position. I want to observe this individual's performance before we proceed. You wish to watch him attempt to produce humor. I wish to understand why he attempts it at all. Danny spent the afternoon at the Toledo Public Library, trying to research comedy theory and mostly watching YouTube videos of comedians who were everything he wasn't. Naturally charismatic, effortlessly funny, successful. The contrast between their confident delivery and his own nervous energy was almost physically painful. But as he scrolled through the endless examples of humor that actually worked, he began to notice something. The best comedians weren't just telling jokes. They were telling the truth, painful, embarrassing, personal truth, wrapped in the language of surprise and delivered with the timing that made people laugh despite themselves. Maybe that was what he'd been missing. Maybe all his carefully constructed setups and punchlines had failed because they were trying to be funny instead of trying to be honest. At 4:30 p.m. he closed his laptop and walked the 6 blocks to the laughingstock carrying 3 pages of material that felt more like therapy notes than comedy. Margaret was behind the bar, setting up glasses with the mechanical precision of someone who had been managing a failing business for too long. You ready for this? She asked when she saw him. No, Danny said honestly. But I'm going to do it anyway. Good. That's the most honest thing you've said in 6 months. The open mic night crowd was the usual collection of local hopefuls, music students from the university, and a handful of regulars who came to watch people fail in public. Maybe 15 people total scattered across the tables like islands of judgment in a sea of empty chairs. Danny was scheduled to go on 7th, after a folk singer who only knew 3 chords and a spoken-word poet who was working through some very specific relationship issues. He sat in the back booth reviewing his notes and trying to ignore the familiar pre-performance nausea. What he couldn't ignore, what he couldn't possibly know, was that at that exact moment every satellite in Earth orbit was being monitored by instruments more sophisticated than anything in human civilization. That his small, failing performance was about to become the most closely observed comedy show in galactic history. That the ruler of the greatest military force in the known universe was watching. Magnify the target area, Emperor Kiseplar commanded. The main display zoomed in on the laughingstock, showing detailed thermal imaging of the building's interior. 15 human heat signatures scattered throughout the performance space. 1 additional signature behind what appeared to be a serving area. And 1 signature, Danny Mackenzie, sitting alone at a table in the rear of the establishment. Full spectrum analysis of the venue, the Emperor ordered. I want to understand the context. Additional data streams opened across the command chamber. Acoustic analysis revealed low-level ambient noise consistent with nervous social gathering. Electromagnetic monitoring showed the simple electronic systems that provided lighting and sound amplification. Chemical sensors detected elevated ethanol levels throughout the space. They consume mild intoxicants during humor consumption, observed intelligence coordinator Vexiero. This may enhance their susceptibility to cognitive surprise, or reduce their capacity for critical evaluation, suggested Fleet Admiral Zekmori. A chemically compromised audience might respond positively to humor production attempts that would otherwise fail. Then why, Kirkthathaler asked, does this individual continue to fail even with chemically enhanced audiences? None of the War Council had an answer. On the display, they watched as a female human approached the small platform and began producing what their analysis software identified as music. Organized sound patterns, with rhythmic components and emotional content. The audience responded with moderate attention and periodic applause. Commence recording of all audio transmissions, the Emperor commanded. I want complete documentation of this individual's performance. Your Eternal Majesty, ventured Ground Commander Hick Stallion. With respect, the bombardment schedule will proceed after we have completed this observation. The conquest of this planet is inevitable, but the opportunity to study this phenomenon may not be. The Emperor, who had spent 3 centuries analyzing the weaknesses of enemy species, found himself genuinely curious about the psychology of persistent failure. In all his experience of conquest, he had never encountered a being who continued attempting something they were demonstrably unable to accomplish. It violated every principle of rational behavior he understood. Danny Mackenzie, called the host, a university student with theatrical aspirations and terminal optimism. You're up. Danny stood on legs that felt like water, walked the 15 feet to the small stage that had become the site of so many small humiliations, and adjusted the microphone to his height. The spotlight felt familiar now, hot, harsh, unforgiving. 15 faces looked up at him with the patient expectation of people who had come to be entertained and were prepared to be disappointed. He looked down at his notes, 3 pages of material that was nothing like the setup punchline formulas he had been trying to perfect for 6 years. No observations about airline food or relationships. No carefully constructed wordplay or observational humor about universal experiences. Just the truth about what it felt like to fail at the thing you most wanted to do. So, he began, his voice finding the microphone through muscle memory. I've been doing comedy for 6 years now, and in that time I've learned something important about myself. I am consistently, reliably, spectacularly bad at it. A small murmur from the audience. Not laughter. Exactly. But attention. I mean, I'm not just bad, I'm professionally bad. I'm so bad at comedy that I've actually inspired other comedians to quit. They see me bomb and they think, well, at least I'm not that guy. A couple of quiet chuckles. Danny felt the familiar flutter of hope and immediately tried to suppress it. But here's the thing about being terrible at something you love. You start to understand failure in ways that successful people never will. Like, success is just one outcome. But failure? Failure has infinite variety. You can bomb quietly or spectacularly. You can die slowly or crash and burn in seconds. You can fail because your material is bad, or because your timing is off, or because the audience just doesn't like your face. More attention now. People were actually listening instead of waiting for him to finish. 400 miles above, Emperor Kirkthathaler leaned forward in his command chair. His 3 eyes focused intently on the audio feed from the small comedy club. Analysis of audience response patterns, he commanded. Engagement levels increasing, reported Vexiero. Vocal indicators suggest growing interest rather than diminishing attention. This is unusual for this individual's previous performances. What has changed? His content appears to be more personal. Instead of attempting to produce humor about universal experiences, he is speaking about his specific experience of humor production failure. He is finding humor in his own failure. That appears to be the case, Your Eternal Majesty. Korvax de Palar processed this information. In his 3 centuries of conquest, he had observed countless species under stress. Fear, anger, desperation, submission, all predictable responses to overwhelming force. But this human was transforming his failure into entertainment. He was taking the very thing that should have destroyed his self-worth and somehow making it valuable. Continue monitoring, the Emperor commanded. Full analysis of all vocal and behavioral indicators. Danny found his rhythm. the words flowing more naturally than they ever had in 6 years of trying to be funny in ways that weren't fundamentally him. And the worst part about being bad at comedy isn't the silence after a joke fails. It's not the uncomfortable coughing, or the people checking their phones, or even the bartender turning up the music to cover the awkwardness. The worst part is the hope. The audience was with him now, leaning forward instead of checking their phones. Because every time you get on stage, some delusional part of your brain thinks, this is it. This is the night everything changes. Tonight I finally figure out how to be funny. And every time you're wrong. But you keep hoping anyway because the alternative is admitting that you've wasted years of your life chasing something that was never going to happen. Real laughter now. Not polite chuckles, but genuine recognition. People seeing themselves in his specific failure and finding it somehow liberating. So why do we do it? Why do we keep getting up here night after night to fail in public? I think it's because failing at something you care about is still better than succeeding at something you don't. And maybe, just maybe, if you fail enough times in enough different ways, you eventually fail so completely that it wraps around and becomes something else entirely. Margaret, behind the bar, had stopped wiping glasses and was actually listening. The couple at table 3 had stopped their whispered argument. Even the drunk businessman had looked up from his phone. So this is me, officially failing at comedy for maybe the last time. And you know what? It feels pretty good. The applause, when it came, was real. Not enthusiastic, exactly, but genuine. The sound of people recognizing something true, even if it wasn't traditionally funny. Danny stepped away from the microphone, feeling something he had never experienced in 6 years of performing. The sense that he had actually connected with his audience, not by being funny, but by being honest about not being funny. In the command chamber of the Eternal Conquest, something unprecedented was happening. Emperor Kixthalar was experiencing what humans would have recognized as curiosity mixed with something approaching appreciation. Analysis of the performance outcome, he commanded. Positive audience response achieved, reported Vexicero. Applause duration and intensity suggest successful humor production, despite the content being specifically about humor production failure. He succeeded by acknowledging his failure. More complex than that, Your Majesty. He transformed his failure into a different category of success. He found a way to make his inability to produce traditional humor into a form of humor itself. Korvax Teeler stood silent for several minutes processing this information. In 3 centuries of conquest, he had never encountered a cognitive strategy that transformed weakness into strength, failure into achievement, disadvantage into something else entirely. This is impossible, he said finally. Failure cannot become success. Weakness cannot become strength. The laws of evolutionary competition do not permit it. And yet, Vexicero observed, we have just observed it occurring. Your Eternal Majesty, interrupted Fleet Admiral Zekmurai. The bombardment schedule is postponed indefinitely, Kixthalar declared. I want this individual transported to the flagship immediately. Your Majesty, use the personal transport beam. Bring him here. But the invasion will proceed after I understand what we just witnessed. For the first time in 3 centuries of absolute rule, Emperor Kixthalar was genuinely uncertain about something. And for the first time in his species' history, uncertainty felt more interesting than certainty. Danny was accepting congratulations from 3 people who had actually enjoyed his performance when the world ended. Or began. It was hard to tell the difference. The light started as a gentle blue glow around his feet, then intensified into a column that seemed to reach from the floor to somewhere beyond the ceiling. He had time to think this is not normal before the familiar weight of gravity disappeared, and he found himself moving upward at a speed that should have been terrifying but somehow felt perfectly natural. The laughingstock fell away beneath him, then the building, then Toledo, then Ohio, then the curve of the earth itself became visible as he accelerated through what should have been the killing vacuum of space, but felt more like warm water. When the movement stopped, he was standing in what could only be described as a crystal cathedral, surrounded by beings that definitely weren't human and definitely were staring at him with the intensity of a doctoral dissertation committee. The largest of them stepped forward, 6 arms, 3 eyes, and an aura of authority that made Danny's high school principal seem like a playground monitor. Danny Mackenzie, the being said in perfect English, I am Emperor Kexthalar of the Sci-Fi Dominion. We need to talk. Danny, who had just experienced the most successful performance of his comedy career, followed immediately by what appeared to be alien abduction, did the only thing that made sense under the circumstances. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle or a nervous giggle, but genuine, uncontrolled laughter at the sheer absurdity of the universe having a sense of humor after all. You know what? He said, wiping tears from his eyes. This is the weirdest heckler situation I've ever been in, but I'll try to work with it. Emperor Kexthalar, conqueror of 47 worlds, felt something he had never experienced in 3 centuries of absolute power. He was curious to see what would happen next. 3 hours later, in the most unlikely first contact scenario in galactic history, Danny Mackenzie found himself sitting in what appeared to be the universe's most expensive office, explaining comedy to an audience of beings who commanded firepower capable of sterilizing planets. So humor, he was saying, gesturing with a cup of something that tasted like coffee but glowed faintly blue, is basically about surprise. But not just any surprise. It has to be the right kind of surprise, at the right time, delivered in the right way. Emperor Kexthalar listened with the focus he had once reserved for military strategy. But your previous attempts at surprise generation failed consistently. Right, because I was trying to surprise people with stuff they'd already heard. Generic observations about relationships or work or whatever. But tonight I surprised them with something they hadn't heard. The truth about what it's like to be bad at the thing you love. And this truth gave them pleasure. It gave them recognition. They saw something in my failure that reflected their own experiences. Comedy isn't really about being funny. It's about being honest in ways that make people feel less alone. The Emperor's 3 eyes focused on different aspects of Danny's expression as he spoke. You transformed weakness into strength. I guess. I finally stopped trying to be something I wasn't and started being what I actually am. Turns out what I actually am is someone who fails at comedy in interesting ways. This should not be possible, observed Intelligence Coordinator Vexigaro. In all our analysis of conquered species, we have never encountered a cognitive strategy that derives benefit from acknowledged failure. Maybe that's because you keep conquering them before they figure out how to laugh about it, Danny suggested. Silence fell across the command chamber. The idea that conquest might prevent the development of certain cognitive abilities had never occurred to any of them. Tell me about your planet, Kexthalar commanded. About your species. We're complicated, Danny said, settling back into his chair. We fight each other constantly. We're terrible at long-term planning. We're destroying our own environment, and most of our governments are some version of organized chaos. This does not sound like a species worthy of preservation. Maybe not, but we're also the species that invented music and poetry and comedy. We create art for no reason except that it makes us feel better about existing. We tell stories that help us understand things we can't explain, and when everything goes wrong, we find ways to laugh about it. Your laughter serves no survival function. Doesn't it? Tonight, when I was being honest about failure, I felt more connected to those 15 people than I've felt to anyone in years. Laughter is how we tell each other, you're not alone in this. That seems pretty important for survival to me. Kovacs considered this. In his 3 centuries of conquest, he had brought order to chaos, strength to weakness, unity to fragmentation. He had created the greatest empire in galactic history through the systematic application of overwhelming force. But he had never made anyone laugh. What would happen, he asked slowly, if I chose not to conquer your planet? Danny blinked. You mean you haven't already? The decision is under review. Well, if you don't conquer us, we'll probably keep doing what we've always done. Fighting, creating, loving, failing, trying again. Making each other laugh when things get too heavy to carry alone. And if I do conquer you, Danny thought about this seriously, then you'll have 7 billion people who know how to transform failure into something else entirely. That might be more dangerous than you think. The Emperor, who had never known doubt, found himself facing a question that had no clear answer. What is the value of beings who can find joy in their own destruction? Emperor Kexthalar, came the voice of Fleet Admiral Zekmorai. The War Council is awaiting your decision regarding bombardment protocols. Korvac Souther looked at Danny Mackenzie. Failed comedian. Accidental philosopher. Representative of a species that somehow found strength in weakness and hope in failure. Postpone all military action indefinitely, he declared, and prepare a general communication to the planet below. Your Majesty? I have a proposition for humanity. At 11:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, every television, radio, computer, and mobile phone on Earth simultaneously received the same message, delivered in perfect translations of every human language. People of Earth, I am Emperor Kixthalar of the Sci-Fi Dominion. My fleet currently surrounds your planet with the intention of conquest. However, after observing your species, I have decided to offer you a choice. Around the globe, 7 billion people stopped what they were doing and stared at their screens. You may submit to incorporation into the Dominion, accepting the benefits of our advanced technology and the peace of unified rule. The pause stretched across continents. You may teach us to laugh. In the laughingstock in Toledo, Ohio, Margaret Flanagan dropped her cigarette and stared at the television behind the bar, where the image of Danny Mackenzie appeared next to that of an alien emperor. Your representative, Danny Mackenzie, has demonstrated that your species possesses cognitive abilities we do not understand. The capacity to transform failure into success, to find strength in weakness, to derive pleasure from honest acknowledgement of your own limitations. Danny's face filled the screen, looking exactly as bewildered as everyone else on the planet. We propose a cultural exchange. You will teach us humor, we will teach you the technologies that will allow you to survive your own environmental destruction and expand to the stars. Together we will explore possibilities that neither of our species could achieve alone. The transmission ended with coordinates for a meeting place, the parking lot of the Laughingstock, and a time tomorrow at noon. Across the planet, humanity had 12 hours to decide whether they wanted to be conquered or become teachers. In Toledo, Ohio, Danny Mackenzie, failed comedian, accidental ambassador, the first human to make an alien emperor laugh, sat in the most advanced spacecraft in galactic history, and realized that sometimes the universe really did have a sense of humor. It just took 6 years and an alien invasion to find it. The Laughingstock had become the unofficial headquarters of interspecies diplomatic relations, which was probably not what Margaret had in mind when she'd reluctantly agreed to let the Sci-Fi Dominion set up their cultural exchange office in her back room. Danny Mackenzie, now bearing the official title of Ambassador of Humor and a salary that had eliminated his financial anxieties forever, stood at the microphone on the small stage that had witnessed so many failures and looked out at an audience unlike anything in the history of comedy. 15 humans scattered among 47 different alien species, all of them trying to understand the cognitive mechanisms of surprise-based pleasure. Representatives from conquered worlds who had traveled across the galaxy to study this strange new form of therapy that the humans called laughter. And in the front booth, taking notes with the intensity of a graduate student, sat Emperor Quaxthalar, who had officially relocated his capital to Toledo, Ohio, for reasons that the Dominion War Council was still trying to understand. So, Danny began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had finally found his audience. Emperor Quaxthalar came to me yesterday with a question about Earth humor. He said, Danny, I have conquered 47 worlds, commanded 3 million soldiers, and ruled for 3 centuries. But I still don't understand why humans find it amusing when someone slips on a banana peel. A ripple of anticipation went through the mixed crowd. So I said, Your Majesty, it's not funny because they fell. It's funny because for just a moment, this person who was trying to look dignified and in control was revealed to be just as clumsy and surprised by life as the rest of us. We laugh because we recognize ourselves in their failure. Several of the alien species made sounds that their translators rendered as various forms of amusement. The Emperor's 3 eyes focused on Danny with what had become his characteristic expression of intense curiosity. And then he asked, But why does recognizing shared failure produce pleasure instead of distress? And I realized that this might be the most important question anyone has ever asked about what it means to be human. The room fell silent. The kind of attention that Danny had spent 6 years trying to achieve and never imagined would come from an audience that included beings capable of interstellar travel. Because, he continued, laughter is how we tell each other that it's okay to be imperfect. It's how we turn our struggles into something shareable instead of something shameful. When we laugh at our failures together, we're saying, you're not alone in this weird, difficult experience of being conscious in a universe that doesn't care about your dignity. Emperor Quix, Felar leaned forward, his massive form somehow conveying intense interest despite the fundamental differences in body language between their species. And that's why humor might be the most important thing we can teach you, Danny concluded. Not because it's useful for anything practical, but because it's how we survive the impractical experience of being alive. The applause that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. A combination of human clapping, Zeph-high harmonic resonance, Vectoron mandible clicking, and at least 12 other forms of approval from species that had never before experienced comedy. After the show, as the mixed crowd filed out into the Ohio evening, Emperor Quixifalar approached Danny with the careful respect he had once reserved for opposing generals. "I have another question," he said. "Shoot. In your previous career you were unsuccessful at producing humor. Now you are successful. What changed?" Danny considered this, looking around at the laughingstock, still the same cracked vinyl booths, still the same failing neon sign, still the same small stage where he had bombed for 6 years. "I stopped trying to be funny and started trying to be honest. Turns out they're not the same thing, but sometimes they work together. And the difference? Funny is about getting people to laugh at your jokes. Honest is about helping people laugh at the things that are too true to be comfortable. The first one makes you a comedian. The second one makes you human." Emperor Quixifalar, conqueror of 47 worlds, nodded with the solemnity of someone who had just learned something that might change the course of galactic history. "Thank you," he said simply. As Danny walked home through the streets of Toledo, past the pizza shop where he still lived, past the library where he had researched comedy theory, past all the familiar landmarks of his small, ordinary life, he couldn't help but smile at the cosmic joke that had made him the most important person in the galaxy by teaching him to embrace being unimportant. Above him, the combined fleets of the former Dominion, now the Galactic Coalition of conscious beings who are still figuring things out, hung in orbit like a metal constellation, their crews learning to find humor in the vast uncertainties of existence. And in comedy clubs across 47 star systems, beings who had never experienced laughter were discovering that sometimes the best response to the universe's fundamental absurdity wasn't conquest or submission, but the simple acknowledgement that everyone, everywhere, was just making it up as they went along. The universe, it turned out, really did have a sense of humor. It just took the right audience to appreciate it.